The story begins in 1997 in the state of Washington. Kate Martin is arriving in a small town called Index, where she plans to spend a few days with her parents, Jean and Bernice. She is with her son Jesse, who will take the trip to go hunting with his grandfather. In the kitchen, Bernice is preparing two very different snacks, as her husband cannot eat the same things as his grandson. When she asks about Jesse's situation at school, Kate says he is still being bullied, but she thinks everything will resolve soon and prefers not to interfere. Outside, Bernice hands the treats to the boy, and Kate says goodbye to both of them. Jean doesn't wait for his wife to enter the house before stealing his grandson's snack, and even says he is doing him a favor because bacon is unhealthy. Arriving at their destination, Jean parks in a clearing and grabs the rifles from the trunk, handing one to his grandson. This isn't the first time the two have hunted together there, and the boy's already used to handling firearms. The target is a deer, which Jesse manages to hit right away, following his grandfather's instructions. However, the shot does not bring the animal down, so they both run over to follow the trail of blood while it is still fresh. Jesse doesn't seem very excited and tries to take a break for a snack, but Jean doesn't want to hear about it and pushes on. The boy obeys and quickens his pace to keep up with him, only to become distracted when he hears a strange sound. He peeks through the leaves of a bush and appears to see some sort of animal as he begins throwing pieces of food. Farther ahead, Jean hears the moans of pain from the wounded deer and quickly finds it. It's only then that he realizes he is talking to himself, as Jesse has strayed off the path for some time. Irritated, he shoots the downed deer and starts retracing his steps to look for his grandson. While he calls out his name and becomes increasingly worried, Jesse is walking quickly to catch up with the animal and suddenly stops when he encounters something inexplicable. In the middle of the forest, there are stairs with a fork at the top, and on both sides the steps end abruptly, leading nowhere. Despite the strange location, the staircase is in great condition and shows no signs of neglect or abandonment. All this piques the boy's curiosity, and he decides to climb a few steps. Still looking for him, Jean finds his backpack left next to the rifle, which disappoints him a little. After climbing the first flight, Jesse sees that mysterious animal down below and runs back down, circling the staircase. He seems startled upon reaching there. And then we see a pair of pale arms grabbing his head. Jean panics upon hearing the boy scream and runs toward the sound, also confronting the strange staircase. Jesse is still screaming, and suddenly his head appears from behind the staircase as if something is shaking him in midair. Upon seeing his grandfather, the boy tearfully apologizes before being pulled away, disappearing from view. Jean rushes over and seems to see something terrible as he starts screaming and even fires a shot forward. 20 years later, brothers Josh and Nick are making their last stop before reaching Saltisac, where they plan to embark on a long, multi-day hike. When they tell this to the cafe attendant, he reminds them that today is the so-called blood moon and advises them to be careful, as many people go missing during the phenomenon. His wife cuts off this talk, telling him to leave the young people alone, but Nick notices that the wall is indeed filled with posters of missing people. Josh notices that Nick has this on his mind and laughs at his naivety, not believing in such superstitions. After that, the two arrive at the meeting point where Josh's girlfriend, Rebecca, greets the duo enthusiastically and introduces her friend Jordan. Josh finds it strange that his friend Chuck is late, and it is only when a familiar rumble approaches that Nick reveals the truth. He says that Chuck bailed on them at the last minute, which is why he invited Doug in his place despite the troublesome reputation the friend has. To everyone's. To Josh's dismay, Doug arrives, parking in the worst way possible and shouting inappropriate jokes out the window, as well as shamelessly stealing Josh's snack. Resigned to the company, each one gathers their luggage and the trip begins. After walking for 5 hours, Nick starts to show signs of fatigue, but Rebecca sadly informs him that they have barely completed half the way to the campsite. With a pained expression, Nick forces himself to continue while the others mock his miserable physical condition. However, a few kilometers ahead, they agree to take a brief break before the friend faints. Helping out with the backpack, Josh discovers that part of this exhaustion is due to Nick ignoring Rebecca's instructions about the luggage, bringing much more weight than recommended. Doug starts rummaging through Nick's things, and Josh is upset to see a knife of his, apparently stolen by his brother. Nevertheless, he offers to swap bags with him, and Nick agrees to leave part of his belongings hidden behind a rock to lighten his load. A little after resuming the hike, the group encounters what seems to be a type of shelter built from branches. The boys grow curious, but the two girls find it too strange, and everyone decides to keep going. Ahead, Rebecca stops to tie her shoelace while the others move on. While she is looking down, we see a female figure in a yellow dress suddenly appear in the middle of the trail and quickly approach her. Rebecca is startled to see the decomposing feet, and the vision only worsens as she lifts her gaze. With her clothes all dirty with dirt and blood, the woman emits an animalistic sound through her bizarrely sharp teeth. Scared, Rebecca covers her face with her hands and then sees that the apparition is moving away. But now there are a series of chilling murmurs coming from all sides. Dazed, she starts calling for her friends and tries to catch up with them when the woman in the yellow dress reappears. Rebecca screams and tries to flee from her, reaching that rustic shelter from before. For a moment, she thinks about hiding there, but then sees that the apparition is already waiting for her inside. It is then that her friends appear, worried about the screams they heard. Rebecca is very agitated and tries to explain what she saw, but her account sounds crazy. Doug returns to the trail, laughing at her distress, and Josh asks if it was just dehydration, which makes her even more nervous. Nick is the only one who feels a bit scared upon hearing her describe the woman. At train at this moment, they hear Doug screaming and run to see what happened, finding his shirt caught in a tree and his backpack fallen near a lake. However, he soon emerges from the water laughing, proud of his silly prank, only to realize that his body is covered in leeches. Jordan removes them with a lighter while Rebecca recovers, and soon the group resumes the trail. Shortly after, they begin to hear a frantic voice, and Josh is the first to see the bizarre scene that awaits them ahead. There is a man in a suit in the middle of the forest talking non-stop and looking down. Getting closer, Josh sees a woman in a yellow dress sitting on the ground, and Doug is startled by the grotesque injury on the back of the man's head, who still doesn't stop talking. He says it was all unintentional and that everyone will be fine as long as they don't disturb the thing. Rebecca steps back in fear upon recognizing the woman who is holding something in her arms, and Jordan tries to help her until she realizes it is a baby. Everyone is horrified when the crying begins, and the man in the suit becomes increasingly nervous, but Josh does not let him approach the woman. Only now does he seem to notice the presence of the young people and become furious, telling them not to meddle in family matters. He pulls a gun from his jacket and points it at the boys, but the baby's cries disturb him so much that he ends up using it against himself. The shot seems to come out through the old wound, as if all this had happened before, and the man continues talking while standing. The woman also stands up, revealing a horrendous creature that looks more like a giant larva squirming in her hand. The young people run away as the man starts shooting, and Josh ends up leaving Nick's backpack behind. No matter how much they want to return to the car, it is getting too close to dark to make it in time. Therefore, they set up camp right there, and Josh stays on watch first while the others sleep. With the help of some herbal tea, Doug has a very interesting dream with Jordan and doesn't wake up when the sleeping bag starts being pulled out of the tent. As he is dragged through the brush, his fantasies blend with the real landscape, and he sees himself passing by Josh. The giant larva also appears in the path, and Doug catches a glimpse of his captor, who is a type of humanoid creature. When the dream reaches its peak, Jordan transforms into an extremely hideous monster and seems to be tearing apart a pillow, but in fact, it is Doug himself being attacked by the creature. He finally begins to scream, frightening Josh and waking the others. They notice Doug is missing, and Josh thinks he must just be startled because he stuffed himself with that tea. Rebecca is still very shaken and doesn't want to leave the fire to look for Doug. However, Nick points out the marks in the dirt, indicating that something was dragged, and says that Doug wouldn't have gone too far without taking the lantern. With little choice, the others agree with him, and the four begin the search under the light of the blood moon. Following the marks on the ground, Rebecca only finds one of Doug's shoes, but the trail ends soon after, as if the guy had simply vanished. Josh says he must be nearby, and a few steps ahead, he finds the torn sleeping bag stained with blood. Rebecca panics at this and wants to take a shortcut that leads to another road where there is a forest ranger station. Josh says they can't go anywhere until they find Doug and starts blaming her for forgetting the map at the camp. Jordan interrupts their argument to point out a strange light in the middle of the woods not far away. Josh thinks it must be Doug and convinces the others to go there, where they find the mysterious staircase. Its appearance is identical to what it was 20 years ago, except for the two chandeliers hanging from it. Jordan asks how that can be powered, and no one can answer that question. Josh begins to climb the steps to the top of the first flight, despite Nick's pleas to do so. He is fascinated by its strangeness and ignores the others, concerned until his brother makes a sincere appeal. Still amazed that there is not even dust on the steps, he begins to descend but suddenly stops upon hearing muffled voices. One of them is a boy calling for his grandfather, and the other is an old man shouting the name Jesse. Going around the staircase, Josh finds a red door that is locked. When the others come closer, irritated by the delay, they also hear the muffled cries and think Doug might be trapped inside. Josh forces the door open and ends up rolling down another staircase, hitting his head and injuring his leg. Nick goes down to help him and says that this is some sort of secret basement so extensive that you can't see its boundaries in the dark. He helps Josh get up and the two begin to climb up to the two girls who are waiting at the top. However, when a scream comes from the bottom of the basement, they think it might be Doug again and decide to investigate. It is then that the two find Jesse curled up in a corner, still the same age he was 20 years ago. He begins to talk about a bad man and runs away upon hearing a distant roar, with the two brothers following right behind him. That's how they discover that the basement is actually a gigantic underground facility, and Jesse claims that the exit keeps changing places. Josh and Nick say they just got there, and the boy rejoices upon hearing that they are going to get him out of there. The three move away without seeing the creature hidden in the shadows, and Josh soon begins to question the path Nick is taking. Coming to an agreement, they proceed until Jesse suddenly stops, gesturing to the side. Nick shines a light on that area and yells upon seeing the same monster that attacked Doug. The three run for the exit where the girls are still waiting and let Jesse climb up first. Nick is right behind, but Josh pauses for a moment, saying the monster is gone. It is just then that he is suddenly knocked down, and the creature begins to eat him in front of his brother. Screaming, Nick runs upstairs and slams the red door shut, collapsing from exhaustion. Rebecca says it's time to get out of there, but he only moves when the door starts shaking as if someone is trying to get out. He hurries away and barely escapes in time, seconds before the monster breaks down the door, but soon trips and falls. Feeling sorry for him, Rebecca decides to go back, and the three find him in the middle of a stinky mud pit a few meters from Doug's body. When Nick stands up, he shows his friends that there are several other bodies there in the various stages of decomposition. Shock turns into terror when the roars of the monster draw near, and they all run aimlessly until Rebecca spots a trailer parked in a clearing. The four hurriedly make their way to the vehicle, but only three manage to get in as Rebecca is grabbed from above before she can reach the door. Nick tries to hold her, but he is horrified by the amount of blood pouring onto him and ends up letting go to quickly close the door. Jesse explains that that thing won't give up because it is always hungry and needs to feed its offspring as well. Confirming these words, the monster begins to advance against the vehicle, shaking everything inside. The attacks are fleeting, and the trio takes advantage of the breaks to talk and plan their next steps. Jesse finally introduces himself, and Nick has a puzzled look upon hearing his name. After a few questions, he discovers that they already knew each other, as Nick was one of Jesse's classmates at school, and he remembers his disappearance with his grandfather in the 90s. Jordan Ken. She can hardly believe what she is hearing, but Jesse explains that upon passing through the red door, he felt like he was entering another dimension. Jesse also tells that there were many exits in the darkness, but he and his grandfather never had the chance to use any because there was always a monster in the way. Speaking of which, Jordan notices that there have been no attacks for a while and thinks it's time to peek outside. Jesse disagrees, saying that Jean taught him that those beasts never give up on prey once they have sniffed it out. Not listening to the boy, Jordan and Nick start to approach one of the windows, but they barely get close before the vehicle suffers another attack. Nick loses his patience after that and begins searching for anything he can use to defend himself. Jesse offers a small knife that his grandfather gave him as a gift, but Nick says it needs to be something much bigger. Rummaging through the driver's cabin, Jordan finds a rifle and starts loading the bullets, interrupting the process when another attack comes. Jesse says the monster can hear them, and that gives Nick an idea. He asks the other two to make noise while he opens the side door and throws some pots away. By the metallic sound that follows, they realize that the plan worked, and they agree to repeat the strategy. The difference is that this time only Jesse is tasked with the racket since Jordan is busy with the rifle again. Nick opens the side door and throws the last three pots, drawing the creature's attention. Jordan tiptoes down from the trailer and fumbles a bit with the gun's safety, thus losing the element of surprise. The monster turns to her and begins to advance while she is still clumsy until the shooting finally starts. However, they are not enough to stop the beast, which simply continues advancing and fatally attacks Jordan. Nick rushes back inside, horrified by his friend's screams, but does not let himself be defeated by the loss. Grabbing a gas canister, he tells the boy to lock the door after he leaves and says that if he doesn't come back, Jesse should stay there until the monster goes away. Then Nick exits the trailer, throws the canister, and waits for the beast to come to him, shooting a lit flare afterward. This causes an explosion, and the creature flees, screaming on fire. Nick still tries to help Jordan, but she doesn't survive. From afar, he sees the sinister staircases on fire, and then Jesse appears beside him, saying he wants to go home. Hours later, the area is filled with police, and the sheriff cannot believe that this is indeed Jesse Martin. However, no one finds the staircase or Josh's body, which makes Nick's story hard to believe. Even stranger is the reunion of the Martin family, as Jesse barely recognizes his mother when she arrives 20 years older. Bernice also comes to welcome the boy, and he apologizes for getting lost from his grandfather, saying it was all dark. After facing the interrogation, Nick is released by the police and decides to keep in touch with his childhood friend,